All right, today we're sitting down with Jason Krawczyk from a local agency here in Washington State. He has a vast knowledge of the corrections world, done a lot of work in the training side of things. And I'm just really excited to hang out with you, man. I've seen a lot of your stuff on social media. We've worked kind of adjacently in different worlds throughout our careers too. And so I'm really excited to just kind of dissect what you've done in your career in corrections and kind of highlight a lot of the impact that you've made.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, super cool. So one of the things that we really like to highlight because it happens so often is how you got into the world of corrections. You know, a lot of times um, we either just stumble into it or we have aspirations of other sides of law enforcement, and that's where we end up. But I'd love to hear your story and what brought you to the world here.
So, okay, it might be a little bit long, but it's an interesting story. Um, my mom and dad are from Chelan, Washington. All my family is from Chelan, Washington, most of them. And it's a unique story how they all came to Chelan. And I'm just plugging a little bit of family history here. So,
Sure.
in one side of my family in 1900, my great grandpa came from the Krupp Iron Works in Germany as an Italian to work in the Holden mine.
Wow.
He tempered steel in the Holden mine, and in 1907 he went back to Italy, got my grandmother and brought her back. They ended up homesteading, creating a farm and creating a family, and um, that's one side of my family. The other unique, and this is what some people know, is the other side of my family. My dad is a Holocaust survivor.
No way.
My grandparents. My dad was born in Siegburg, Germany, in 1943 during World War II. My grandparents were taken from what was Poland at the time, or present day Ukraine, near a town near Kovel, by the Nazis and put into forced labor.
Wow.
So after the war, I mean, my grandma told me stories about they'd be out working in the fields, and they had it really good, relatively good compared to a lot of other people. She'd be working in the fields. American bombers would come over. She'd grab my dad's bassinet, run to the bomb shelter, go into the bomb shelter. Air raid sirens would be done. The bombing would be over. They'd go back out to work.
Wow.
So after the war, they were in refugee camps, and after they were given an option: go back to communist Ukraine because it was communism at the time, or go to the United States. My grandpa said, "Well, if I go back there, I'm probably going to have issues because that happened to a lot of people that were taken by the Nazis. The Soviets thought of them as spies and that sort of thing." So he said, "I'll go to the United States." So the Chelan Christian Church sponsored my grandparents and my dad and my aunt, who was super young, to come to the United States, and they ended up in Chelan.
Wow.
So that's the unique story of how my family got to Chelan. So my dad got to Chelan in 1951, and my mom's side of the family, or my grandpa, the Italian side, I'll just use that, was already there. So that's how they ended up being there.
How did they pick Chelan? That's
I
kind
I I don't know. It's just it random. They ended up in Chelan, of all places, in Chelan, Washington.
of threw a dart at the map, and that's where they
Yeah, yeah. They went. My grandparents went from. They took a boat over and went to Ellis Island. Went from Ellis Island. Took a train from New Jersey to North Bend. North Bend, they went by car to Chelan.
wow.
That's how both of my family ended up in Chelan. So then, as family evolves, my family went to the west side in the 60s. My mom and dad, they got married in 67, went to the west side. So all my extended family was always in Chelan, but I grew up in the Linwood area, Motley Terrace.
You're kidding. That's so
No. So, um, and so I grew up in that area, but I always wanted to be back here. My grandparents were here. Both sides of my family were here. So if we did a family Christmas, my grandparents were in the same town, both of them. Um, I really spent a lot of time with my mom's dad, my grandpa, hunting, fishing, doing all the outdoor stuff, and I'm an avid outdoorsman. So that's where I became my love for that kind of thing.
And Cheyenne's beautiful, by the way. I mean, like it is either in the winter or especially in the summer. It is a beautiful area too. It's much better than Linwood.
So I'll tell you, funny thing about Chelan is, and there's some in the history notes that my great grandfather was one of the first wine grape growers there.
Wow.
He
Okay.
would make his own rock gut wine as an Italian, and so he started growing wine there very early. There were some stories about losing some crops and some other stuff, but he grew his own wine grapes to make wine. And I remember my grandfather telling me one time that he remembered his dad telling him it reminded him a lot of northern Italy where they were from. So they're from a village that's in how to get there is you get through the Italian Alps or the Swiss Alps, and it's up by Milan.
Wow.
So that's where they were originally from. So the wine thing, but anyway, that's how my family ended up in Chelan. So I grew up on the west side. I went to Montlake Terrace High School. I met the Zaldas when I was really young. So you worked with Nate.
I did. I love that man.
So when I was about 6 or 7, Nate's mom used to be a babysitter daycare, so I knew his entire family.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
so anyway, so bringing it into college, I'm going to college, and I'm like, how do I end up in North Central Washington? What do I do? So I looked at a lot of different options. I studied biochemistry at the U, and I did some other things, and then I thought about going to law school. So I emphasized all my studies on law stuff, political science, that sort of thing, because I had planned on going to law school. Well, getting out of high school and going right into college right away. I was getting burnt out with school,
Oh yeah.
and then so in high school at Montlake Terrace at the time they had Russian as foreign language, and so I took 2 years of Russian, and to graduate at the U, you had to have the third quarter of a foreign language. I didn't remember the Russian I took, so I ended up taking intensified Spanish over the summer,
Oh wow. Okay.
which is it was equivalent of 3 quarters of college Spanish in the 9 week summer quarter, 5 hours a day.
Oh my God.
It was brutal. It was very brutal. And so I did that, and I'm like, I'm done. I took my last class and graduated from college, and I'm like, now what do I do? And I'm like, well, why don't I go into look at law enforcement? Well, now back to the Chelan background. Most of my family are farmers or teachers, but my grandpa's older brother was the chief of police of Chelan.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I had never met him. He died before I was born,
Hmm.
but he was the chief of the Chelan Police Department for years, and he also was a Chelan County sheriff. And so I'm like, well, maybe I'll look at the law enforcement thing and see what that's all about. So then I went and saw John Zalda, who was the commander of the Linwood Police Department or assistant chief back in '97. And he said, why don't you go on some ride alongs with some guys?
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And so I'm like, all right, I think this is what I want to do. So I started the testing process.
Hmm.
So back then, you'd have to go through the Cooper standard for the physical fitness test. You take your writ and do all that, go through the process. And it's a long, drawn out process. So I kept testing and testing, and I would score, mid road. And then my cousin said, who worked for the Chelan County at the time, said, who was testing for the road force, said, hey, the jail's taking tests. Why don't you test for the jail? And
And
I'm
I
like,
think to put things into context, it's not like it is today, right? Like we we have maybe 20 applicants and 200 spots across, the state. Back then, you had 4 spots and like 400 applicants,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. That's exactly how it was. So I went and tested for the jail, and along with some other agencies, they ran a combination test for the road, the jail, and Chelan PD at the time when Chelan PD was still had a police department. So I took that test, scored there like 4, I think, maybe 5. And then in July of 99, I took the test in April, July of 99, they called me and said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Absolutely."
That's awesome. Yeah.
So um, they did all the testing, and October 1, 1999, I started in the jail. And it was very unique because I got married, which was planned for September 19th of 99.
Okay.
I got married. I had a kid, which was a surprise coming. I moved and started a new job all within like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
Lots of life change, man. That's
lots of
great.
life changes, a lot of things. I'm a big first, but I'm go big or go home.
Right. I get
So,
that.
so that's how I ended up at the jail.
So you kind of fell into it. Was it what you expected when you got there, or were you kind of surprised by some of the things that corrections officers have to do?
Yeah, I was totally surprised. So I remember the first time I walked into a tank. Now, our jail is linear. It's not direct supervision. It's indirect, and we have 3 floors, and the second floor is 2-tier cells. So there's 4 of them, and they have 2 tiers with individual cells inside. And I remember the first tank I walked into with all the inmates milling around, going, "What did I just get myself into?
Yeah.
What is this?" I was just in awe. Um,
They're all frothing at the mouth at the new guy ready to rock and
yeah,
roll.
yeah. Look at the duck,
Yeah.
and so it was definitely an experience, eye-opening experience. I was really excited. I still love my job to this day, despite all the evolvements that have happened over the 25 years with people and the inmates and that kind of thing. But um, yeah, I was totally spooked. I didn't know what to expect, um, and it was definitely, they were like trying to get, the inmate manipulation stuff, trying to get to know me, trying to get my story, all that kind of stuff. I started with a good group of guys that all ended up all as supervisors. One went to the road, and then all ended up as my supervisors and mentors. And a couple of them, one of them I still work with to this day on the team. The rest of them have all retired. So,
That's
but
awesome.
yeah.
That is awesome. So you're there. How long? I mean, I know that Chelan County, and I just said the agency, so I'll scrub that out later. But I know that the agency has different specialty units. One of the things that we intersected at my agency for a while was the transport team. We worked a lot with transport teams and stuff like that. Did Once you were there and kind of settled in the agency, what opportunities did you have?
So, it was actually, I got promoted rather quick, and that's part of the reason why I didn't end up going on the road. There's a
Mm,
couple of reasons for that. So, the first reason is the academy. When I started, the COA was 4 weeks, and BLEA was, or the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, was 3 months.
right.
They did a change. COA was still 4, but they did a change. I think it was to 4.5 months or 5. And I had a brand new daughter at home, and I didn't want to miss some of those moments in the first few years of their life. So I'm like, I'm good here. I'm happy where I'm at. And they changed the academy. I didn't want to be gone for that long period of time. So I stayed at home, and then in 2003 I got promoted to corporal.
Okay. All
So
right.
now we're talking, if jumping to the road, I'm taking a financial hit a bit to
Right.
change and go through all that. So having a stay-at-home wife, which we were really big on, mom stays home with the kids, and I was going to work the overtime, do the things to make sure that we didn't have kids going to daycare and that sort of thing. That was always a big thing with my wife and I.
Well, it's a
And
full
so,
economy in that way, right? Like we're paying we're paying for daycare, but we have to work harder to get more money to pay for daycare. So it's always twist that up.
yeah, and that was exactly it. So then I stayed. I got promoted. I got stayed, and then I started the field training officer stuff. So
Mhm.
back then, all the corporals were your field training officers.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So not only it was a rough dynamic because if our sergeant was gone, we were in charge of the facility, but we also had the FTO, so that made it difficult.
Yeah, you're juggling a lot there.
Yeah, you're juggling a lot. So I was an FTO for a long time. I'm still an FTO. I don't do it.
Mhm.
I read the reports but I got into the FTO side, and then I was FTOing, and then I was just working a shift. I worked weekends for a while, for 6 years. Uh, we had 5 teams at the time, and I decided to work the weekends because I wanted to work with the newer guys that were always eager
Yeah.
to do the job, and we're always excited. So there was a time and place where I stayed, even though I had a bid to be on a weekday shift where I could have weekends off. I stayed on the weekends. It was also good because we had rough but good because we had 10-hour turnarounds. So I'd get off Monday morning at 7, and I wouldn't have to go back to work till Friday morning at 7. So I had a long period of time off, but when I was working, I was working.
Yeah, yeah. Brutal.
So that's kind of how it started out. And then with firearms, I never really did any pistol anything growing up. Everything was all hunting rifles, uh, hunting, archery, any of that stuff. So I got into the pistol stuff. And then I became a range safety officer, I want to say around 2008.
Now, let me ask you some questions about that. Um, at that agency, did you have corrections officers teaching firearms at that time, or was it something that you would assist with the road guys that were doing the training?
The corrections officers taught us. So it's unique because when we were with the sheriff's office, we had jail guys running the range, and we had county guys run the road guys running it, and they would both run it together. So if
That's
we
awesome.
showed up for range, it was both. It was the road or the jail, and then it slowly evolved into just the jail guys teaching and the road guys because we switched agencies. But for
Mm,
the first, I think we switched in 2001 when there was some political stuff and things went on, and we went from the sheriff to it was 2001 or 2002, I don't recall. um, but when I first went through the firearms stuff with the agency with Chelan County, it was most of the road guys were there, and it was one day. They give you one day with a firearm. It was a Glock 21 45. Everybody had to carry a Glock 21. It didn't matter. It was a Glock 21 Gen 2,
those are
and they gave you one day. They called it Glock transition, and the idea was it was the transition was from wheel gun to the semi-automatic pistol. And we got the one day, and our qualification was on a steel quarter IPSC target or half IPSC. um, if we hit 13 out of 18, we were golden. It didn't matter where we hit them as long as they hit the steel. It could have hit the post and you hear ting, so you hit them. So
it was close enough.
it
Yeah.
was close enough, and that's how it was. And then when we broke away, we had our own guys that were with the sheriff's office that were firearms instructors, so we started doing our own programs, and that evolved. And as it evolved and got into more, we got into rifles,
Mm.
um, and then we got to our agency firearms stuff where I became an RSO. I think it was around 2008. It might have been earlier than that. So I was an RSO and an armorer.
Wow. So what interested you in that? Right. I mean, I'll say there's a lot of officers that'll go into their facility and just want to cash the check, but what interested you in trying to do those other duties?
Just being involved. I mean, being involved in other places and learning all the aspects of corrections and things to do was something that always interested me. I mean, there's always things to do in corrections, but I live and breathe it now. And as we get further in this, I can tell you about the time that I wanted to leave training. So, you know, it's one of those things where you have to evolve and you have to make it what it is, and you have to be willing to put in the work to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And what can be challenging, and I experienced this too, is you try to put that effort in and wanting to make it your own, and um, trying to develop those programs. And then because you're not a solo ship, other people have opinions and other people want
Correct.
to do the same thing, and you end up butting heads sometimes.
Yeah.
And that can always be challenging. But I think as long as everybody's at the table that has the end goal in mind, which is let's make better COs, I think that
Right.
those things can get brushed over. So
Yeah. That's ultimately where I'm at, is to make a better CO all the way around, not just on the firearm side. I mean, if you really looked at my background, you'd think I'd be a DT instructor or use of force instructor on that side, because I mean, I'm I was a
it's
wrestler growing up. I am a jujitsu blue belt. Um,
nice.
I would if I didn't have some health issues, I'd probably be a lot further in my jujitsu stuff. Um, but I had to take some time off for some health issues and some other stuff. But
That always
and
pops.
So you would think I would be a use of force instructor, but I tell you, I hate getting punched, and when I'm striking and doing some of that stuff, I'm all thumbs. It's it with a fight for me. It's going to the ground because that's where I'm best at.
Sure.
Um, I'm okay. I'm nobody, but I do have some skills in my background. You think I'd be a DT guy, but and I had some good guys that brought me in when I first started at the agency, that they really tried to mentor me on the DT side, and I had a bunch of guys that they'd throw on the suit, and I remember when we had a fist suit, and I talked about it. This is the guy's retirement, the old fist suit, and he took the mask out because it was just open.
Right.
I'd been there about 3 weeks, and I was training, and I didn't know anything about striking or that type of fighting, and I threw a haymaker, and it ended up right in there, right in the
The
and
problem with those fist suits is it's like a big funnel, right? If you take
yeah,
that thing off, it guides your fist right into that thing. That's
yeah,
awesome.
it did, and he's like fixes his nose and goes, "All right, we're done for tonight." And but so I had some good guys, and that's where I picked up some of the stick training, some other martial arts stuff. But you would think I would be on that side, but yeah, I'm far from that. We have great guys in my agency that do all the training, and you've trained some of them yourself.
Yeah,
And those guys have got it down pat, and I let them do their thing. Um,
that's awesome.
but you would think I would do that, and but anyway, so I was an RSO, and they started asking for instructors, and there were three of us that put in for it, and I really wanted it. So I'm like to myself, how am I going to get this? How am I going to make myself over these? Because I was an average shooter, average operator with the gun. It wasn't all that good, but what could I bring to the table that was different?
Mm.
And when I showed up, I had a PowerPoint, I had all these other things, and they were just blown away because I coached wrestling. I've been on the teaching side. And done that part. So I kind of had an idea about bringing some of the teaching things to the table. So I'm like, what is going to make me that much better? And then I got picked to go to the instructor school in 2011, and I've been instructing ever since.
That's awesome. And I think you bring up a good point, right? Because you don't have to be the best fighter or the best shooter as an instructor. People always say that, right? Like, hey, look,
Right.
you have those things are critical, but what's more important is the ability to take information and transfer it to others. That's really what
Absolutely.
important. And if you highlight that as your skill set, to me, that's more valuable than being able to, shoot a target with your eyes closed at 25 yards or whatever. So
Right.
I love that you did that and kind of highlighted that piece to it.
Yeah, I had to work really hard at doing all that stuff. I was never the best. I would outwork some people. And when I wanted to put the effort into it and I showed, here's what I can bring to the table, they were blown away. That was their exact words. Here's visual aids, here's a PowerPoint, here's what I do here. And in fact, I used that same PowerPoint and some of that stuff for my um, teach back at the academy when I did some of that stuff for the instructor school. I'd already had it built.
Yeah. So tell me more about what you experienced as an instructor. My guess is when you say that you're talking about the 2-week firearms instructor school at the academy. Is that right?
Correct. I've never been one to test well. That's
Okay.
just not me. I'm not a great test taker, like standardized tests. So the qualification just freaked me out. I mean, I was stressing about it all night, and I showed up and blew it. First one I blew, and I remember JT Joel Turner. Um, he was one of the instructors there. Kelly Pitts.
Yep. Legends.
Yep. I believe his name's Jeff Katzer.
Yep.
Uh, there was also a couple new guys coming up, Brian Moen and Dan Knight.
Hmm.
And there was also I think Bob Cecil was the guy running it.
Yeah.
Well, all JT said to me is he showed me up and he did this. I took a breath, did it, and shot one of the best quals I ever did. And so from then on, Kelly took a liking to me or something, let me shoot his own duty gun, as I started to get into it, and I started to really, really get into that stuff and enjoyed it and passed, did well. I was there it was weird because when you go to, as a corrections officer, when you go to training, you're not only the COs in there, but you have road guys and some other people. And I was in there with a bunch of SWAT dogs and high end operators, and there was 3 COs, and birds of a feather flock together. So the 3 COs were sitting in the back of the classroom, and we just kind of built our relationships and went forward. And all of a sudden, the whole SWAT team, a bunch of them were from King County, would be running out because they got a SWAT call. And
Right.
so that's where I ended up, got my firearms certificate and started teaching firearms stuff.
And at the time, you were teaching for your agency, right?
Yes.
How did that go? Did you develop your own program? Did you have a robust program at the time?
So I had 2 other guys that were really big into firearms training. One of them was actually worked at DOC, was on their CERT team,
Oh wow.
their ERT team, and came to our agency. So he was head of it. I had another gentleman that was really good at knowing the stuff, not so effective at teaching to adults,
Got it.
but really had the good stuff. But a really big mentor of mine, not only here, but on the hunter ed side, because I'm also a hunter ed instructor. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I do that too. So anyway, I started going on with their program, and they took it from 1 day to 3 days. So we went from 1 day of firearms training to 3-day program, and now you're blessed with ongoing training to carry a firearm for our agency. So then that's kind of was our model. We did this 3-day thing, and then we had another guy. We had some cutbacks, and he had to go to. He went to another agency, and then I think in 17, 18, he came back to ours.
Oh, wow.
And he
Okay.
was a firearms instructor. And he started teaching with us, and we started changing some things with our program with his ideas and changing qualifications and things like that. And then we went through some admin changes.
Mm.
So our old guy, our old head of the firearms program stepped out. So there was kind of like three of us kind of looking at who was being the head.
Right.
And then our new chief at the time said, "Okay, Krawczyk, you got the ball. It's your baby for a little while." And so I started running with it, and then I wasn't sure with it, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, because everybody that's a trainer gets to a point where they get that burnout where I'm done training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as we were working on it, and I was seeing the program evolve. So we ended up going from a 5-day program. Well, I mean, a 3-day program to a 5-day program. 2 of those days were done during FTO, where we would do we'd go through our PowerPoint for that with use of force, lethal force, running the gun operation, things like that. We'd do some cert stuff, some dry stuff. Then we go out to the range, see how they operated a gun. And then they'd come out to the range and do the 3 days when we did our basic firearms class.
So you could lay a lot of the groundwork ahead of time without having to be on a range, without having
Right.
to do it yet. Did you see a significant increase in performance when you got to the range, or what were your results with that?
Absolutely, because we could start looking at the little things that people were doing as a shooter and then trying to help them and give them some skills that they could go practice before we got to our 3-day sort of thing. There's a lot to be said about dry reps on stuff, making
Sure.
sure your movements are proper and getting through it before you even press the trigger and go bang.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny because for forever, there was kind of a mindset that, hey, look, you can't do firearms training unless you have real bullets and a real gun and you're on a range. You just can't,
Right.
it's not firearms training. And when you really think about it, with the advent of the SIRT gun, and for those that don't know, a SIRT gun, SIRT, it's actually made in Ferndale, Washington, but it is probably, in my opinion, the best tool out there to train firearms. It's like a laser pistol modeled after a Glock or a M&P or SIGs now. I'm sure they got more models, but um, you can do movement, you can do draws, you can do trigger press, you can do side alignment, side picture, you can do all of those things without actually having to press a real trigger on a real gun. And once that's done, in my opinion, what I found is that even the people that were terrified of guns, like a lot of that goes away because now, hey, look, I've done this before. Yeah, it's not live and there isn't like an inherent danger with it, but I've done this before and I've been there, and now all I'm adding is one more layer of difficulty, and that has been huge for us too.
Right. So back to our program. So we did do that. And then so we're like, we got rifles and we want to have people that are rifle qualified too. So what we did is we took 3 days of handgun plus their other two and then added the rifles on the end.
Hmm.
What we found is with some people that worked, but for some people that they really struggled, and we ended up dropping the rifles to a different time.
Hmm.
And then now our program is 5 days or 40 hours out on the range. And knowing what they do at BLIA now, BLIA is 55. That's what they've changed their firearms program to. So I think we're right up there.
Okay.
Our qualification at the present time, which I'm probably going to change this year, is a little more difficult. We actually can have no goes if they throw them off the silhouette.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at. 5-day program on our basic handgun stuff,
Right.
and then we have rifles that we take out on transports, out of county transports, and that sort of thing. And now we're more on the specialized of the getting the court team guys up to speed on the rifle. It's just The change in the process and getting everybody on both weapon systems is hard, but we're working on it. It's always a work in progress, as training.
Sure. Yeah. And you're juggling a lot. And maybe let me ask you this. What is the biggest difference between teaching somebody to shoot a pistol and teaching somebody to shoot a rifle? Like, what are the disparities that you're finding there?
Well, typically with the rifle, you have a different sight plane. It's longer, you have two hands on it, and it's a little easier to control. You have
Yeah.
people less likely to have pre-ignition recoil issue recoil issues. When the gun goes off, they're not holding that explosion in their hand.
Right. Right.
Um, it's just, and it's shoulder mounted, easier to operate. And I think people the recoil on it is nothing
Right.
comparison to other rifles. So it's just louder. That's
Yeah.
some of the things I've found. And a lot of people have more experience with rifles, shooting BB guns as kids and things like that growing up. So the rifle's not as foreign to them as a handgun.
Okay. Yeah. If you think about some of the feedback that I did, because I taught firearms from 2014 to 2019, I think, at the academy. And we got a lot of military coming back. And I was surprised. I was never in the military. That wasn't my path. But I was kind of surprised that a lot of the military guys were like, yeah, I don't know anything about pistol. I'm like, really? Okay.
Mhm.
And so it's a whole other ball of wax trying to get them to not think rifle when we were shooting. So
Right. Right. And there are things like you see some military guys where they pin the trigger and do some of the things that the military taught them. And you have to kind of break them of some of that,
yeah,
especially when you get into the handgun stuff. It just depends on what level they were at. Teaching at the academy, I see guys that come in for new on the road that were retired SF,
mm-hmm.
or then you have the guys that were just the door kickers, just your basic infantry, and their training is night and day different.
Yeah, it's totally different.
And I'm not a military guy either. That wasn't my path either. I always tell people I was a college boy. I wasn't a military, but a lot of people ask me, what branch were you in? I was never in the military.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't college or military. I was strictly CO. But I I think that because of that, a lot of the training that I received, I was able to really cater to what we do in the jails, right? And for transports when it comes to firearms and stuff like that. Because I'll tell you, one of the things that I experienced heavily was because my agency was there was a police department attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
There, corrections officers couldn't teach firearms. Listen, firearms are really important. If you're in the jail, you're not good enough to teach firearm. That's just how it is. That's
Right.
what's the mentality, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I knew that not to be true. And what ended up happening is the academy liked what I was doing in our defensive tactics worlds and saw that I had an ability to go and get information across to other people, like we were talking about. And they actually sponsored me to go through the firearms school and kind of take that modality and bring it to the range, which was really cool. Because then I got to go back to my agency and say, "Hey, I'm a firearms instructor now." Haha, right? And so then they started using me to go do that since I already had the certificate. And the cool thing for me was, people always ask, why do corrections officers need guns? Because you're in the jail, and that's like maybe the case 60% of the time, but the other 40% were in court, remanding people, taking people into custody. We're on transports, going to the hospital, going to other facilities, going to other courts, right? And so you're wearing the same uniform, you're in a marked vehicle that says police on it or says sheriff's office on it, and you're the same amount of target that any patrol officer would have. So we need to have that training as well, and we need to have
Absolutely.
capability. So that was always the argument, and now it's coming back up uh, because there were some laws that were passed here in Washington State that it really is up to your chief or your sheriff to give you permissions to carry that firearms as a corrections officer, and some are electing not to do that, which is terrifying for me. So it's always an uphill battle.
Yeah, and that's for me. And I can think of two scenarios just in the last few years. One involves me and my agency and another deputy, and then White over at Spokane County, if I can say that,
Oh yeah.
had an incident where he had to use lethal force. We also had a deputy get attacked in the jail this last year, or the year before. It was a year before. Time gets away from you when you work nights and do all. So yeah, he was attacked and stabbed. Luckily, none of them were bad wounds. He was fine. Ultimately, our deputy passed. He got in a motorcycle accident that same year after it happened. So, miss you, Chewy. Just giving that plug out to him. Anyway, so I'll give you what happened to me. So you talked about we're going to hospitals and transports and that sort of thing, and people forget about weapons of opportunity and things that you could just come across. So myself and another deputy were on a transport, took a guy to the hospital, and our local hospital here, and we're checking the inmate in. We check in just like everybody else does. We have no special anything. We show up in our car, we walk them in, they're in restraints, that sort of thing. And the hospital was relatively empty that night. And the nurse comes around the corner and says, there's a guy with a knife in the lobby, which is just around the corner from me.
That's a problem.
So I'm like, well, okay. So I go around the corner and I look, and there's this gentleman sitting against the wall there with a knife in his hand. And mind you, the knife's closed. It's not open. That's probably the one thing that saved this gentleman is that I start talking to him just because I don't know him. I don't know what's going on. What's going through my head is he might try to hurt himself in the hospital. That's kind of what his hands are clenched. He's all tensed up. He's something's
unheard of, right? Because the people that are on the bubble of making that final
correct.
decision, they want to do it at the hospital because if there's a fail safe, that's where it's going to be, right?
Right. So I'm just trying to talk to this guy, and he gets up and he starts walking toward me. Mind you, he's got an edged weapon in his hand. It's closed, and I start saying, hey, guy, you need to stop. You need to back up. And he kept advancing toward me, kept walking up toward me, kept walking up toward me, kept walking. And in my head, I'm playing, okay, this is what I need to do. Okay, close quarter techniques. I'll slap his hand, arm will come up, I'll draw, do rock and lock, and if I have to use lethal force on him. And it got to the point where I probably let him get a little too close to me. If we had batons, I probably would have used that to knock the knife out of his hand, but we didn't have batons at the time.
Sure.
And he walked up to me and stopped, and I literally had taken my gun, the safety's off, it was coming out of the holster, it was in my hand, I was ready to do what I needed to do. And he stopped, and he held his arm like this, and I put my hand underneath it, and he dropped the knife in my hand and walked out.
So he just handed it to you?
Yeah, he just handed it to me. And my partner around the corner had already drawn out and was trying to figure out what was going on because I'm yelling at this guy.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand in corrections, you don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen.
Yeah.
And I had this scenario at the hospital. I use this in all my training going, you may work in this career for 30 years and never have to have anything like that. But the odds are in this day and age, you might.
Yeah.
And so
you're probably not going to have a lot of them,
right?
But it's going to happen once.
Yes.
It's going to happen once,
Yes. So that's my scenario in that respect, where it really came close outside the jail where I thought I might have to use lethal force. Did I let him get too close to me? Yes. Was I confident in my grappling ability? Yes.
And the blade's closed, right?
And the blade's closed.
Barrier there.
So But knowing how knives operate,
Mm.
if it was an automatic knife and that popped open, then now you've changed the game.
That's done. Yeah, absolutely.
You've
And it
changed.
happens in a split second, right?
Right. So um what was what I got through it is through my training, my head was already going on what I was going to do before it even happened.
Mm.
And that's all from my training.
That is, it's such an important piece, right? Because sometimes, and I'll tell you, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a new generation of leadership, um, but I don't get this as much. But it used to be administrators were so hyper focused on that's probably never going to happen.
Right.
That attitude that they wouldn't even shed any light on it. And what we know is that you have to be responsible with your training dollars for sure. You have to focus on the high occurrence, high liability stuff.
Correct.
But if we don't train our brains to address a situation, if we haven't gone there, then our body isn't going to respond the way we need it to, right?
Absolutely.
We call train the mind, prepare the body.
Right.
And the challenge is, and my guess is the only reason why that went as well as it did for you is that you've done that before. You had
Correct.
been there before mentally and in training. So
Well, and it's like I tell people I teach wherever I teach is this isn't the way, it's a way, and it's putting that tool in your toolbox so that you've experienced it before so you can have some process on how to go about doing it. Because if you've never experienced it before, when your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your respirations go up, and you start, you're going to fall back to your training. And if you've never seen it, you're not going to know what to do.
yeah, you're not going to perform your best when it's
Correct.
brand new and your system is going south, right? Like
Right.
that's the problem.
Right.
Well, that's good, man. I'm glad that worked out. Those are
So,
always,
and that's been a big thing for me, making sure I train people because you know as well as I do, our world is changing. Things are changing. There's different things going on. We have a mental health crisis. We have a fentanyl crisis. We have all these different things that we see in the corrections world and law enforcement world all the time. And we need to be training our people. And that's the plus with my agency and how we've evolved. There was a point there where we didn't even have enough money to buy ammunition
mm,
to train. And now I have several $1,000s to buy ammunition. And I learned the process. And I can't, how I learned to do this was from guys from the sheriff's office that I teach with currently on the advanced side and were mentors for me. And so uh, they helped me do the same kind of thing because their agency had the same kind of problem and they evolved. And I'm like, well, how did you get to have a surplus of 30,000 rounds? Well, here's how we did it, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time.
little bit of a time, and then I know for us, what really helped just to hit it again was those cert guns, right? I don't need to make it go bang every time we go training. I have these other things that I can do, and then save the live rounds for when we do need to practice that. And that was a huge paradigm shift for us.
Yeah. So we're just starting to get into some of that again. So one thing in my agency that we did that a lot of jails don't do is we did force on force training with simunitions and that sort of thing. And so we started doing some of that and then it went on the wayside. And then we started bringing it back last year. We trying to get it evolved. We've had a rash of norovirus and COVID and things going around, so we had to cancel our training for the last week, which was going to be some force on force stuff, scenario based training, and uh, a lot of stuff with cert pistols that I can do in a safer environment. That I can use a mat and not on the concrete, and then the range and that sort of thing. And those drills that I'm going to do when I went to the guy that runs the DT side of our program and myself went to one of Gary Drake's classes.
Gary Drake, the legend. Yeah.
Yep. And it was ground survival and weapons retention. So some of those things I learned there, I'm going to use as drills that we've never done before, teaching backfalls and we've done shrimping and stuff on the DT side, but we've never done it using a firearm or a SIRT pistol, be able to shoot from that position. So we're going to do some of that. Um, I've made some targets up for that. We're going to do some seated stuff. Like if we're sitting having a cup of coffee waiting for transports, we got some good stuff coming up, and then we'll do our scenario based training, which really, when you really get into it, that's an epiphany for people because they don't know how things are going to happen when projectiles start flying back at them.
Well, and that's the thing, right? And you kind of touched on it earlier. A lot of people will develop their training programs with the limit of where their budget is, right? Hey, look, this is what we're going to do because this is all we can do. The problem is that that's not the standard. The standard is what is the stuff that's going to happen out in the field that we need to prepare for.
Correct.
That's the standard. It has to be reflective on what reality is. It can't be, the buck can't stop. Hey, look, we're going to fire, 400 rounds during this qualification. It has to be, hey, we need to be able to move. We need to be able to shoot at low light. We need to be able to draw in close quarters, that type of thing, right? That's the standard. And if you're not training to that and you're just going through the motions, you're really not helping bridge the gap between performance and reality. You're just not.
Correct. And there's, for firearms, I mean, everything, there's case law. There's everything from the Ninth Circuit and those kind of things. And typically what I do for my training program is what I start at the year and I look at Popow versus Margate and I go, here's what I need to train on this year.
Right.
And then that's how my training calendar goes. So coming up before it turns daylight savings time, we'll do our low light shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll go out and we'll shoot multiple targets. We'll shoot target ID. And you don't have to, you don't have to make it this extravagant big thing to do. I mean, you can do target ID with a SIRT pistol. Call out number. I use a lot of the Department of Corrections targets because I get a big bang for the buck. I got a good silhouette. Plus, sure. I have shapes, numbers, and colors. And I can go, okay, 1, 2. That's their fire command. They got to hit 1, 2. There's right. Target ID right there. Thinking through a process. We got to be thinkers out there these days.
Yeah. That's one of the things. So we just got back from teaching our CERT team school in Tennessee, and it was a great time there. Honestly, it was so good, and we had a blast. Those people are solid. But one of the quotes that we use, and I'm trying to find it, I probably am going to butcher it if I just try to rock it off the top of my head. But it goes something to the effect of a society that separates its warriors from its philosophers will have its fighting done by, or its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools, right? And the days of being able to show up to the game and just knock people around, those are gone, right? Yeah. But also are the days of, hey, look, I'm just going to let these knuckle draggers go handle business while I sit here. Those are gone too. We have to be both of those things, right?
Yes.
I love it.
Well, and old sergeant told me this a long time ago. He said, I'd rather spend 10 minutes talking than 2 minutes fighting.
For real. Yeah.
And that's, you can get so much done talking. There's a time and place, being in corrections. You got to keep order. You got to keep those kind of things. There's a time and place for everything, but I'm the same way. I'd rather spend a few minutes talking, finding out what's going on and talking to somebody than 2 minutes of fighting and spending reports or getting someone hurt or something like that. Not for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good message, man. And I think training people to do that with scenario training, or like you said, force on force training, and being able to break that up a little bit, because we used to run scenarios where, we could do force on force training that never lead to actual force on force. We would get up in our gear and we would see how people would react, because in training, it's so funny. You put on one of those fist suits or a high gear suit or anything like that, the assumption is we're fighting. That's what's happening. All of the actual skills go out the window. Mm-hmm. And so we will currently do this. So anybody that's listening that's trying to game our classes, just because we're in a suit doesn't mean we're fighting. If you are de-escalating, we will do that too.
Well, and that's it. Last year we had a scenario which, as well as going on a transport, we're walking into a clinic and we have an assailant come in that wants to get the inmate.
Yeah.
How that officer talked is a direct reflection on what that person did in response to how they were talking to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were times that they did everything right, talked everything right, and that's how it went. But then if it went sideways, it went sideways. So that's what we did.
I love it. Well, man, it's been great talking with you. It is so interesting how parallel our careers. I had no idea that you had a history in Linwood. I had no idea about any of that stuff. It's so cool, and I feel like we could talk for hours.
So it's funny in Linwood, my parents moved there in 67, bought a house in 72. And I went to Hazelwood Elementary and they used to ride, when I was growing up, people would ride horses up and down my street. That's how much it was pasture land. The Zaldas they lived up off of Poplar there in Linwood, and they had a farm.
Yeah.
And they had a cow, and they would grow cattle and they'd slaughter cattle. I mean, that's how Linwood has evolved from when I was a kid growing up. But I went to Montlake Terrace High School. I went to Briar Terrace Middle School. John Casebeer, who was a legend in the wrestling community, was my middle school wrestling coach.
Wow.
John Casebeer also coached Randy Couture.
Yeah.
And he also coached Ivan Salivary. And Ivan Salivary, who's used to come up, he went to Montlake Terrace High School and used to come up when I was a senior and roll around with us.
That's awesome.
So I've had some cool experiences in my life and some cool things. And I'm nobody without all the other guys that push me and do all the things. I mean, I couldn't be where I'm at with the guys. I mean, some of the guys pushed me, and some of the things I did. Before COVID. I know we could talk for hours, but I was going to tell you about this. Before COVID, I wanted to be out. I was getting at the end where I was done with training, and one of the other guys is, the state had two master programs. They had the master in firearms and they had the master in DTs.
Yeah.
One of my guys wanted to be a master firearms instructor, and I was all for it. But then COVID came up, and then there was some of stuff with the shot. Well, I had taken the shot, and he said, well, why don't you do it? And I really thought hard about it, and then I started pushing for the master. They've since changed, but I did all the requirements. I did a decision paper for my agency. I did all these things, and my boss saw the benefit of it. And I said, here's some benefits if I do this. And so they let me take all the classes. And that's how sort of semi-evolved into the BLIA stuff. That was interesting how that happened, because all that happened because of LinkedIn.
Really?
Yeah. So I had done all the firearms stuff. The only thing I hadn't done was actually lead a level 1 class on my own. So I had everything I needed for the master firearms stuff, and they were still in flux on how it was going to be and how I still don't have that title. They're going away from that stuff, as you know, on the DT side and that sort of stuff. Anyway, so I saw a post on LinkedIn where they said they needed instructors for BLIA. Steve Hawk put it on. And I contacted the academy and said, hey, what do I need to do? If you guys need firearms instructors, I'm willing to help out. Here's all my training. Here's all my certificates.
Yeah.
Agency says go ahead. And so I got hired on by the academy last February, and then I started teaching and started teaching from then on at the academy. And I was given the option. Henry, who's in charge of the firearms program now, said, you can teach at the regional academies. You can teach here. You can teach in Spokane. I looked at the distance between Spokane and Burien, and I went, you know what? It's about the same. I'm going to go to Burien where the decisions are made.
Yeah.
And so that's where I decided to go. So next week I'll be back in Burien teaching. Weather for me, getting over the mountains and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Be safe.
I covered. I had surgery on my hand, so I'm all recovered from that. So next week I'll be back on the range in Blia, starting my next contract and working from them, which I absolutely love. I love if there's something I can give to these new cops out on the road that helps save their life. That's what I want to do. Like I'm toward the end of my career. Granted, I'm not at the retirement age yet, but after 25 years, this is a young man's game.
Yeah.
And so I'm at the tail end. I mean, 5, 6, 8, 10 years, however long my body holds up, keeps going. But if I can give something back that I learned, not only on the training on the firearms side, but on the mental health side. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation, because I really started, I went to CISM a long time ago, and I'm on the regional team for call outs and that sort of thing for big events. And I just got picked up by our agency for peer support, but we had a couple of use of forces here from other agencies. And I talked to officers and talked about how they felt, how their agencies dealt with stuff, and the lack of peer support and the lack of mental health stuff for us in corrections. And the law is just not there. And we're so class A alpha personalities that we don't want to talk about it.
Right.
I remember the first epiphany I ever had as a corrections officer was I read the book On Combat.
Mm-hmm.
And it talked about a guy having a dream, or someone that was in there having a dream all the time about their gun not going off.
Right.
And I went, oh my, I have that dream all the time.
Oh no.
So I'm like, well, I'm not the only one. And then I started talking to other people going, I have the same thing. And people don't want to talk about it. Everybody deals with stress a different way.
Right.
And just because we're in a jail doesn't mean we don't have those things. We deal with
human bodies that function human ways, right?
Right. We're dealing with murderers constantly. We're dealing with drug addicts. We're dealing with people that have mental health issues. We're dealing with all these different things. And then not only that, we're dealing with potential fights.
Yeah.
People getting injured, in custody deaths. That's a thing that happens too. Mm-hmm. So all these things affect us. We walk in that room and people think, the general public thinks, oh, it's not that big a deal. But when you walk into a room, you're outnumbered.
Oh yeah.
You've got all these things. You're constantly on. And
there's an inherent conflict between
yes.
You're literally holding them captive. Like that's the job, right?
Right.
So
right. An old guy told me years ago, they allow you to live.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some element of truth to that, because 20 on 1, you're probably going to lose that battle.
Yeah.
So knowing how to carry yourself and be respectful and treat people like you would want to be treated in that situation is a big deal.
Right. Well, and we say too, there's two things that you have to earn, and once you're lost it, you can never get it back, and that's credibility and that's respect, right?
Correct.
In corrections, that's currency, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny, correction story. So we had a guy trying to fish, and for people that don't know about fishing, it's when guys from one cell try to get stuff to another cell.
Yep.
And it was into our booking cage, and he flung it across, and I caught it. And one guy goes, man, the old CO snuck up on me. The OG snuck up on me and took it. It was just kind of funny.
Oh man.
Yeah, because now I'm the old CO.
Congratulations, you made it. That's a win.
Yeah, it's a win. I love my job. I love my career. I love my agency. We're doing great things. Just training in general. I think we do 12 to 16 hours of firearms training a year. We do 12 to 16 hours of DT training a year, in addition to our in-services and that sort of stuff. Training's really big now.
It wasn't always this way, was it?
No, it wasn't. We went a long time without DT training. We always had firearms when we had enough money for ammunition, but DT wasn't so much. It was just about trying to survive. But You got to have those elements in there because no one wants to be sitting on the stand and go, why didn't you do this for training?
Yeah,
You know
exactly.
better.
Yeah, we grab a hold of more people than we ever shoot most of the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise it'd be a war zone out there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love seeing that, and that's one of the things that if you're an agency that can't train because you don't have an instructor or you don't have resources or you don't have knowledge base, because even agencies that have instructors doesn't mean that they know how to actually teach or have the skills set to do it.
Right.
One of the things that we're doing at Arc Tactical is providing in-service training. And so we're going to several, I think we have 11 agencies that partake in our program now. And it's been a huge, huge benefit in our area regionally, but also throughout the U.S. because we're growing into Idaho and Tennessee and Indiana, that type of thing as well. And what we're finding is just that investment into people, it is sparking something, right? It is sparking something, a purpose, giving them the ability and the capabilities to continue that performance track has been huge for them. So I'm glad that this ship is finally changing over. So.
Oh yeah, and so am I. And I know we've had guys go to your training. We've talked about. We looked at one time doing some transport stuff, seeing about bringing you guys in to do our court team stuff. And yeah, the wrap, I was telling you about that. I love that thing. That thing is great. We evolved. We have a restraint chair. We used to use that, but the wrap, that is phenomenal product. I'm giving you guys the props on that. That thing is great. It's a very good tool for corrections when you need it.
Right. I love it. Well, thank you so much for doing this, man. It's good to connect. And where can people find you if they have questions?
Find me. You can find me. Can I say my agency on here?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You can find me at the Chelan County Jail. Email me. I don't know if you want to type it on there or.
Yeah, I'll have
type it. It's jason.krawczyk@co.wa. No, co.chelan, chelan.wa.us. I will give anybody help, any insight that I can give. Like I say, I'm nobody. I just work hard at it. I do practice. There's lots of tools out there. I have a Mantis set up in my garage with the laser that I do, so I can practice fundamentals in my garage. Especially when I work graveyard, I have lots of time at night.
For sure.
So I can practice some fundamentals, do simple things where I'm not pulling the trigger on live fire. Live fire's got to be a part of it, but
oh yeah,
you can do a lot of stuff where dry or different drills. There's tools out there. It's a way, not the way. As one of my other instructors here, you probably know him. On the DT side, firearms side, master in both. That works for Chelan County Sheriff's Office. I owe a lot to all the people that I worked with because I couldn't have done this on my own. I've had lots of good mentors. And my instructor crew, we're a great crew of guys, and we all have different skill sets that we bring to the table that make us a good combination of working on stuff. So I owe it to a lot of those guys, and we push each other. We push each other to be better. So
I love that. If you had one thing to tell a trainer or an officer that's in the middle of their career and they had those feelings of, man, I kind of want to get out and get burned out, what would you tell them?
Take some time, evaluate stuff. I'll tell you what I did. I know you probably got to get going, but it's interesting because it falls into the jiu-jitsu side and that sort of thing. Started jiu-jitsu, was rolling with the guys here at the local gym. One of the guys is a dentist. And he said, I was going through a rough time. I worked in classification, so that's other side. So I moved out. Some things went on, and I wasn't at my best. He said, you got to read this book, Extreme Ownership. Mm-hmm. You got to read this book. And so I did some research on it and did it. And then I read the book and was like, changed. My mindset changed. And then, of course, I was going to jujitsu, and then I was listening to the Plugged for Jocko podcast and
Oh
listening
yeah.
to some of his leadership stuff. And then listening to his podcast, I started looking at books to read. So I read Hal Moore's book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and started reading leadership material going, oh, this is how leaders. So then I started really kind of working on myself, because if I'm not good, I can't be good for everybody else. Not
Yeah.
only my family life, all that sort. So I started redoing that. So that's kind of how I want to say jiu-jitsu saved my marriage. Jiu-jitsu saved a lot of things because I was in a dark place and I wasn't, you know, um,
Yeah.
reading the couple books that I just had. Anthony Gagne. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right.
Angie.
And then William Cooper, is it? Let me
No.
check. I just read his book, and about all the William Young. Sorry, William.
Yeah.
Just read his book, a couple other COs, and was like reading some stuff, going, "Yeah, I remember all these times. I remember doing all this, you know." And then I want to be in the mental health side of helping people. So,
I love it.
so that's kind of how I changed and how it became to where I wanted to do more on the instructor side. It started with that,
Got it.
and then I've read other books and by SEALs and other great leaders. I mean, like I say over and over again, this is a way, but not the way, and there's lots of people that have good things. And I learned in my career that there were people that I wanted to emulate. Now there were certain things about them that I may not like, but I would take the good parts that I wanted from them and I would bring that into me. So I would take those parts and go, I want to be like this for here, and I want to be like this for here, because those all make you whole. And those things, learning all these different skills, makes you a better officer, a better person, better father, husband, all these different things. So
Right.
that's kind of how I ended up changing my leadership. And then I was a corporal for 19 years before I got promoted to sergeant.
19 years. Holy
Yeah,
smokes.
some of that was my own fault. You know, people gotta look at themselves first. If things aren't going,
Yeah.
you gotta look at themselves. Relationships are big. I started working on my relationships. I started doing all these different things, got promoted to sergeant, and you know, looking up, seeing where the future goes now.
Yeah. I love that. That's such good advice. And it's not necessarily um, looking at yourself, but I think that as an instructor, in order to give valuable information to others, you have to invest in yourself and build that up. If you feel like you've reached the end of your bandwidth, then increase your bandwidth by, like you said, reading books or developing new relationships, have a new mentor, um, have a new hobby, do something for you to really build that up. And I know exactly the place that you are talking about being in,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to develop other ways of mitigating that other than what we currently do, which is retreat, isolate,
Correct.
type of thing. So
Correct. And you know, my favorite place to be is on a mountainside, and that's an easy way to get away from stuff and not talk to people and not. While it's really good, you still got to work on relationships and build relationships. And me talking to you is interesting in itself, because that was a kind of started with another Jocko thing. Was
yeah,
they did the it's called the death reset, and where you do the reset and you do other things, and I saw that on LinkedIn and started doing it and started building up people and seeing what they're doing and posting some of my stuff, and then more people started coming on and more people started coming on, and I reached out to you because I'd heard your name in training circles and from guys I worked with and or work with now, and was like reached out to you and saw that you worked at your old agency and went, well, that's old home. I could have been at that agency, but the only reason, one of the two reasons why I was never at that agency, one, I never wanted to arrest or deal with people that I went to school with or known for years. It's kind of funny because that changed with contract prisoners. And two, John Zalda told me, he said, we're having a real problem with laterals and people changing agencies. Test where you want to live.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Yeah.
So, and now I'm here.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for doing this, man. I know that we will have you on again and continue to see your path. Having somebody who's on the end side of the career, I would say, is so valuable to take those lessons. So thanks for doing it, brother. And we'll be in touch for sure.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for everything you do and training and all that stuff. I appreciate all your work. Use your stuff. Our guys talk highly of you that have been to your classes. I think you even posted some pictures of them after a class recently or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
they're awesome.
Yeah, they're great guys. So I appreciate it again. This first time ever doing this sort of thing, and I'm glad to spread the word out.
I love it. Yeah, corrections is a valuable place, man.
Yeah, we need more of us. We really need more of us. It's a noble career. It's taxing mentally and physically, but it's a good career.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. All right, man. Well, take care. Be safe. And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
All right. Take care, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.